they're not your usual pod. They're super stateful, right? I mean, there's a human interacting with this particular state directly, the source code that you're editing. So we must not lose that. We also cannot just move that from one machine to another.
So today I'm joined by two amazing guests, Pauline Narvas and Chris Weichel, head of community and CTO respectively at Gitpod. And this is a tool that enables on-demand pre-configured development environments in the cloud. Today we're going to cover a whole bunch of different topics, including what this kind of concept of remote development environments are, the role that community plays in building out Gitpod as a company. And then at the end, we'll take a look behind the scenes at how the company operates, both from like a people and process perspective, but also a little bit in the technology weeds as well, and understanding how the product works and how the development team iterates on it. So Pauline and Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us. Awesome to be here.
Thank you so much for having us, Sid. Super excited.
Yeah, this is great. We've been kind of chatting on Twitter for a while, and so I'm glad to have you on as a guest now. And so why don't we just start? Pauline, can you tell us a little bit about Gitpod and what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you described it quite well in your little intro, but whenever I pitch what Gitpod is, I tend to go down this route of explaining that. So Gitpod is an open source developer platform that automates the provisioning of ready to code developer environments. And so what that all means essentially is the whole purpose of Gitpod is to try and remove all of the friction from the developer experience, so that developers are always ready to code. And as a result of that, it makes software engineering for the developers just much more like collaborative, joyful, and secure. Essentially, what we are is we're a developer environment platform that allows engineers to spin up workspaces where they can do everything that they need.
Why would I want this as a developer? Like, what does this enable for me in terms of I'm maybe used to using my laptop. I've got my whole environment set up exactly how I like it. I've installed all these packages. Now, what's the value proposition? Why should I switch to Gitpod, either as an individual or as a company who's bringing this to the table?
So yeah, that's a really good question. So essentially the whole point of Gitpod is to try and remove the friction of setting up your dev environment. So you described there that you've got everything set up, everything is configured exactly how you want it. However, there's been instances where maybe you go on holiday for 2 weeks or you don't touch that project for a while and then you come back and everything has changed. And everyone in the room right now is like nodding and they're like, yeah, I've been there. I totally relate to that. And so the point of Gitpod is to try and remove that, the pain of setting up a dev environment again from scratch or trying to update dependencies and struggling with that just because once you update something, suddenly your whole environment doesn't work. And most times you have to like start again from scratch because it's like, why is this not working? So the whole point of Gitpod is to automate that and remove that friction because it obviously takes up a lot of precious energy and time setting up those environments and maintaining those environments as well. Yeah, it also like removes that whole conversation of works on my machine. This time it actually does because everyone spins up workspaces in the cloud. So you shouldn't have that problem anymore because you have those consistent environments. And yeah, I think that is the main reason you would use Gitpod. I don't know, Chris, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I would like to bring this to a company level. As a company, why would I want to bring Gitpod to the table? And our customers tell us, and other studies show that too, that developers spend 5 to 10 hours per week setting up and maintaining their dev environment. And Gitpod cuts that time down to seconds, if anything at all. So we drastically increase developer productivity, also developer happiness, because you don't have to do all that yak shaving, all the setup and maintenance that Pauline was just referring to. So it makes your organization more efficient. It makes for happier developers. And it also makes for a more secure development environment because code no longer needs to live on your laptop. Endpoint security becomes much easier. And, when you're on that shoddy Wi-Fi in some cafe, what have you, less data needs to be on that machine that also, where you're going to run, say, yarn install that can execute arbitrary code right next to where you have all your secrets, your email, etc. None of that is the case anymore. And then works on my machine is entirely gone. You have no configuration drift anymore, especially because of ephemeral workspaces. And we'll talk about what they mean later on, I believe.
Yeah, and I'm actually a Gitpod user, and specifically I set it up recently for my blog dev environment. And so I historically had gone into VS Code. I'm using Hugo to generate a static site. And I found that there was just a high activation energy. Every time I wanted to write a new post, I would always kind of hesitate a little bit and be like, do I really want to go in there and set everything up and get things working? And so I went through and set up Gitpod, in addition to refining a few other pieces of the tool chain I was using. And now it's kind of just like, I go to the browser, I navigate there, spin up a new branch with a new post, and it just isolates kind of the mindset of what I'm doing when I'm working in that mode. And so I think having that sort of clean, fresh environment each time that I want to make a change there is something that I really value about the product.
Yeah, it offers a great peace of mind, actually. So many times in the past when I messed up some Git operation, like say you want to do a rebase of something, you mess it up and now your local state is broken. This time I just close a tab and I start again. And I know I didn't actually do any damage. On top of that, you can work with a lot of things in parallel, which, depending on your working style, can also be an anti-pattern. But depending on your role, you got to do a bunch of PR reviews and some things just take a bit longer. You're running those integration tests. Takes half an hour, you got to do something else in the meantime. You open a new dev environment and you do that without perturbing what you're doing on the other end. So it's really powerful that way. It allows you to multitask and focus depending on how you want to work.
Yeah, and then in terms of these days with applications becoming more and more complex, people have taken their monoliths and blown them up into a million different microservices. It can be a real challenge to get a development environment where you can either have copies of all those services running or mock them out or select the subset that you need. How does Gitpod work in that sense of you're working on one particular service, you might need a whole bunch of other things running or to access those other things. How do you interact with those other services for a particular development environment?
So there are many different ways you can set this up. If you're running in a mono repo, then you can spin up those services, say within a workspace. If you build them out as Docker containers, there's full Docker support, so you can, just spin them out as containers. Or if you are used to running them locally, you can now, you can do just the same thing. You can execute that start script and start that bunch of services. If it's a multi-repo, it's not that much different. Gitpod supports multi-repo configuration where we pull in multiple repos into one workspace. And then depending on the dev setup that you already got, some places use something like Octeto or Garden.io to set up dev environments and preview environments. And we play very nicely with those too. So depending on the setup you got and the requirements of your particular architecture, there are many different ways to accompany them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as you've grown and gotten your product into the hands of more and more customers, are there any particularly interesting ways or unique ways that surprised you maybe of how they're using the Gitpod product?
So we have a feature called pre-builds. And pre-builds are, think of it as a CI system, but for development environments. And so the whole purpose is that when you open such a workspace, Yarn has already downloaded the internet and your tests have run and your code is built and you can really just start working. And we had one client who actually started using that as their CI system proper. It's not designed for that. It doesn't work so well for that particular use case. It works very well in general, but not for that use case. And yet we saw them do it and they were like, yeah, no, this scratches our itch. This does what we needed to do. So there are very creative ways that people have come up using this.
Interesting. Yeah. I bet. How did you even notice that that's what they were doing? Was there some spike in usage or did they talk to you about it or issue a ticket that said, hey, I can't quite do it this way?
Yeah, they told us. Like, they got in
Okay.
touch, they reached out and were like, hey, we want to do that. And like, hey, if you added this, like, that would be so much better. And so we engaged in a discussion on what they were doing and how we could help them get the most out of the product.
The concept of IDEs in the cloud isn't super new. There were things like Cloud9 before, but it seems to have, with Gitpod and GitHub Codespaces, kind of it's much more in the mindset of companies, and people are thinking about adopting it. What's your prediction in terms of adoption growth here? Like, it's still, I think it's still a fairly niche. It's not fully widespread yet. How has the growth been, and where do you see it going over the next handful of years?
So the conversation has totally shifted from why are you doing this to how are you doing this? And so in 5 years, if you're going to join a company and on day one, they go, here's your laptop, here's the README, now go spend a week, set this up. You're going to be like, what do you mean set this up locally? Like, you're not using remote dev environments? Imagine walking into a shop today and they go like, nah, we don't do CI. Like, there's John, he does that every Friday. You'd go like, what's wrong with you people? And that's the world we're going to live in not too far future. Just because this way of working makes so much sense. Like, we've automated everything. We've brought everything into the cloud. We have everything as code except for development environments. It just makes no sense to keep them locally, to keep them constrained to markdown files that have to be manually executed and are probably outdated. The only way forward is to bring this into the cloud and to automate it.
Yeah, it's almost, I mean, the idea of thin clients outside of development has been around, and now we're at this point in time where the technology is right that you can have a fully featured experience in the cloud, and it's as good as working locally. I mentioned a second ago, kind of the other big player in this space, right, is GitHub Codespaces. Can you talk a little bit at all and compare and contrast the similarities and differences between what Codespaces offers and what Gitpod offers?
Mm-hmm. So first off, we were super happy when Codespaces actually came out. Like, it's still not accessible to the general public, it's still not GA, but you can use it in some circumstances. And we're very happy when they did that, because we even sent them a cake. Like, thank you for shipping this. Here's cake.
It's a really nice cake.
We never learned
should show you a picture.
Yeah. There's a blog post about it as well. We never learned how it tastes, though. I was really curious. And the reason for that is, for one, they're going to help us educate. We as you just said, like, it's still, like, I'm not sure I would call it niche, but it's not as widespread as it should be, right? And this is going to help a ton educate that this is the way forward. If a player like Microsoft throws their weight behind this idea, there clearly is something to it. And then the vocabulary they use, the concepts they introduced, the way they think about it is very, very much in line with how we think about it. And so, they use the terms pre-built that we coined, and like they, took a lot of inspiration of what Gitpod is, and that's such a great validation of what it is we've been doing. In terms of Codespaces as a competitor, there's a lot of space for not being Microsoft. It's that simple. Like, one of our core values at Gitpod is integrate, don't dictate. We want to integrate with whoever makes sense. We have a strategic partnership with JetBrains. You can use Emacs, VI, you can SSH into this thing, you can VS Code on the desktop, use VS Code on the desktop, you can use that in a browser. You can use it with GitLab, Bitbucket, GitHub Enterprise. You can't even use Codespaces with GitHub Enterprise. You can't self-host it. You can self-host Gitpod, especially in more regulated industries where any form of the multitudes that can be air gap become relevant. Gitpod is a great choice just because you can run it in this kind of environment.
Got it. Yeah, I think that helps to solidify kind of the distinction there, and the fact that it is open source means that if there's changes that you want to see integrated or need for your particular environment, you can raise those issues and contribute directly to the project. So I think that's a really important aspect, and one that leads directly into the next sort of set of topics, which is community, and sort of why community is so important for Gitpod and what it means to work within the developer experience space as a tooling company. So I don't know if you want to talk at all about that, Pauline, but I know you're building up the community. You're head of community for Gitpod. What is it like to work in this DevX space and sort of why is community so important for the company?
I feel like I could talk about this for hours. How long do we have?
We've got plenty of time. I can speed up the clip. You'll have to talk real quick.
I speak very quick naturally anyway. So this is a really great question. I want to sort of answer this by telling a bit of a story. So when I joined in July last year, we had a bunch of users and we had our community sort of scattered all over the different platforms where developers were talking, and that was things like on GitHub, Twitter. We also had a forum that ran on Discourse, and I think at one point we had we used a platform that was like a chat platform. I completely forgot what it was called. I don't know if you remember that, Chris, because I think it was just before my time, but there was some sort of chat platform that we used. And so, our community was sort of distributed everywhere and there was chatter everywhere. And when I joined, I was the first community hire. And the whole point of my role initially was to try and streamline the community processes and bring the community together, because up until that point, everyone, like I said, our community was scattered all over the place. And then in order to get questions answered about the product, we would also use a lot of engineering time to spend time one-on-one, oftentimes with our users and our community. And so, as you can imagine, it was quite sort of chaotic. And then, when I came in, my role was to try and bring that all together. And so one of the missing pieces I found at Gitpod was the fact that there wasn't a central place where our community could come together and not only ask questions about the product and, best practices, how can they set up their very specific project onto Gitpod, and how can they leverage Gitpod in whatever way they want. They didn't have a place for that, but also there was no place to have these conversations about the future of remote dev environments. There wasn't a place where you could meet like-minded people who were also seeing where we were headed. And so at the time, we were also trying to own the whole topic around developer experience. And we hosted a conference called the DevX Conf, the first one in April 2021, but that was just before I joined. And we created a Discord server for that specific conference so we could have a place to chat. But then we later rebranded that server to then be about Gitpod. And so now we had this central place where developers could ask, hey, how does this work? But also they could hang out with other people who also felt like, oh my gosh, this is the future. I need to geek out with someone about this because this is exciting stuff. And so now we have that. And around that time, we were at around 500 community members. And just a month ago, we crossed the 5K mark. So we 10x'd our community in just a year. And I think it really shows, again, the impact of where remote dev environments as a general topic is going, just because there was a lot of conversations around it over the past year. I actually would argue what you said earlier, Sid, that it's a niche. I don't think it is, but I don't know if that's just me because I sit in the space a lot. I hang out with our community a lot, so I hear the type of conversations, the forward thinking topics that are coming up, but I don't think it's a niche. So that's sort of where we are right now. So we managed to streamline that process, and we're building a small community team that is launching several different initiatives to, again, not just to make sure that our community feel heard and that they're part of building out the product, but also to give them the space to talk about how remote dev environments are going to improve the developer experience for everyone. So whether you're a a professional a developer in a big company, or you code as a hobby, it's gonna change your workflow, and I think that's why it's super special. And we can talk a bit more about like the different initiatives we've launched, but community is at the center of everything we do at Gitpod, and I like to think anyway that our community is definitely a huge part of the whole process of us building out Gitpod, and yeah, and I think that's. I hope that answered your question. I really babbled on there.
Yeah, it did. It did. I think in particular, the fact that it is open source means that the community can be even more directly involved, right? And so I'd love to hear about how like user feedback, either for feature ideas or bug reporting, sort of make it into the product team's life cycle and either the day-to-day or the roadmap in terms of how they can shape the future of the product so that it matches the needs of the end users.
So I could say a bit about this, and Chris, you could jump in as well. But so in our community, we launched community office hours that we used to run weekly, but then it just took a lot of time, and now we only run them bi-weekly. However, it's always a good space for our community to come together, showcase cool things that they've built on Gitpod, but also it's a open forum for people to talk about things they'd like to see at Gitpod, like raising feature requests or something that's not quite working, and they sort of want to bring that forward to the product team. And the good thing about these office hours is we try and encourage the Gitpodders, so people who work at Gitpod, to come and join them and listen in. And oftentimes we always have at least one like product manager or an engineer from one of the engineering teams. And it's really special because you can see like a lot of them get super excited about what the community has to say, and then then after the office hours is done, you go into Slack and you see the conversations of what the community were talking about brought into the like the conversations that they're having internally. But in terms of like process, we because we're open source, we have a process where you can raise issues and feature requests directly from our GitHub repo, and that is usually the best way to raise any feature requests and issues, and then we. From the community side, the community team then triage it to the specific teams and then prioritize it that way. There have been times where like consistently a certain topic would come up in like office hours, or we'd see patterns in our community, and it's our job in the small community team, which is me and someone else, to then just keep raising it internally and make sure that it's seen, because clearly our community they want to feel heard, and they want to I'm trying to find the word to they want to surface it more to the product engineering teams. And I feel like we've got a really good process set up to make sure that the community do feel like that, and I think it's part of our job in the community team to make sure that relationship between community and product engineering is strong, and people feel like they're heard on both sides. Chris, is there anything else you think I missed?
No, I think you're spot on there. Our engineers also have a strong drive towards this direct connection to people who use Gitpod in a commercial and non-commercial fashion. And so they'll actively engage in those discussions, and they sit on the same sort of surface. Like, we don't have a separation today between community and sort of our own issues and tickets that we have. All of them live in the GitHub repo. And so we interact in the same space, and that also helps to sort of keep this strong connection to the community side of things.
And before we started recording, Pauline, you mentioned something you're calling the Community Heroes Program. You want to touch on that at all and what that is?
Absolutely. Thank you for reminding me. So the Community Heroes Program. So one of the main things I learned whilst building out the community is that Even from my first day, there were core people that kept showing up every single day I logged in. There were people there who had a comment about something related to the product or something related to remote dev environments. And I could sense how excited they were to be, excited about the product, but also to be part of the space. And I found that because I've also been part of like ambassador programs myself, where I've been very passionate about a product or a tool or whatever, and I've always got involved in communities over the last few years. And one of the best feelings I had as a community member was when my passion for whatever it is was highlighted and recognized. And then so as part of building out and scaling the community in those early days, I highlighted that there are like 10 people here who are showing up every single day and contributing in different ways, whether that's like advocating for Gitpod on Twitter or social media, or that's like contributing directly to the code, or contributing via raising like bug reports or feature requests. Just they were contributing all over the place, and so I wanted to make sure that their contributions were recognized and highlighted internally as well. So because there is this thing where I've also been part of communities before where there are community members who are so passionate about something and they're not recognized, and eventually it starts building up this almost like resentment for not feeling listened to. Everyone wants to be listened to, and so yeah, like we created this community heroes program to elevate the voices of our core like super fans. And now we started, I think, with 7 community heroes, and then now just yesterday we got up to 27. And these community heroes are essentially the core super fans of Gitpod, and they are distributed all over the world. And the most exciting thing, which I see in the future, which we can talk about a little bit more, but the most exciting thing about the community heroes is that I feel like they are an extension of our team. And they care so deeply about the product, but they also care so deeply about the community. And they want to help out other people, like new people who just come across Gitpod randomly on GitHub or randomly on Twitter. They just jump in and they're like, let me help you get started with Gitpod. And I find that drive to help other people just super magical, and I see it every single day from our heroes. But also another thing is more of the advocacy side of things. So I've seen like for example, one of our biggest groups in our community heroes is actually from France. And we've got like a bunch of like French community heroes who just love the product so much, and they have gone and created small meetups or attended small meetups or even conferences in France where they speak in French about Gitpod. And I find that mind-blowing, and it's already the start of something that could be global. And I'm seeing it in not just in France, but we started seeing some activity in like Italy as well from our Italian community heroes, and I think that is just super exciting. So yeah, just to answer your question there, community heroes is a way for us to recognize those super fans and keep them close, because they are super important as we continue to build out our community and as we continue to build out our product. And I'm just I'm so like grateful to be working and collaborating very closely with people who are equally as excited as us within Gitpod. Because sometimes, when you're so excited about something and you're working on something together, you sometimes think, maybe it's just us that think this. It's just us that love this product. I don't know if we're going anywhere with this, but then when you go out, step back and see other people who are like, yes, I understand why you like it so much. I understand why this like sparks a lot of joy. And I think that's the most exciting thing. And that's actually one of the main reasons like I get up to go to work, because I love the excitement and the drive from our heroes, and they keep me super engaged in the product and like what we're building. So yeah, I hope that answered your question, Sid.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it is exciting to see people outside who don't have necessarily a financial vested interest in the success of Gitpod. They just they want to see it succeed because they've integrated it into their own workflows and see the capabilities that it can bring to others. We talked about the Discord. We can leave a link with an invite in the description, so if people want to check that out, they certainly can. I don't think I'm in it yet, so I should go join, and then you can come join and hang out with all of us in the Discord. But yeah, I'd love to shift gears a little bit and kind of talk about behind the scenes at Gitpod and kind of the work and the tech that you all work with every day to build this product. One thing that I know is unique about Gitpod, a little less unique in the last couple of years, is that it is a remote team, kind of a fully distributed team around the globe. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how you've navigated working in a fully remote setup?
Yeah, so first, I think we want to give an impression on how remote, because there's a large spectrum between we have, 2 offices or 2 hotspots where people are. So we're spread across 22 countries and 16 time zones. We have
and what's the team size currently?
7 to 8 on engineering, which is really at the upper limit of what a team should be in terms of size. At least that's our perspective on it. And then other functions are usually a bit less, but yeah, max 8. That includes an engineering manager and a product manager, of course.
Yeah, and I think in
and
total,
all the other functions.
Yeah, I was going to say sorry. And I think in total we're about 70 now, or close to 70.
That's right. And so we're very, very spread. There are some teams who cannot even have a team sync where everyone can be present at a decent time of the day for them. So it's a challenge, but it's also there's a lot of benefit in it. For one, it really helped us and made it necessary at the same time to develop a strong written async culture. And we put a lot of emphasis on that within Gitpod. So our Notion, the way we work with Notion, the way we work with Slack, the way we make decisions, all of that is sort of centered around crossing that time zone chasm. It also leads to fewer meetings, which is great. And it really helps lift other people up and give them a voice, give them a seat at the table, because things are async. There's an RFC rather than some quick conversation that happens on Zoom or Google Meet. It's a written document that outlines, this is what we want to do, this is why we want to do it, this is how we're going to go about it. And then because of the internal policy that documents are open by default, folks can have a look at that, get a better sense of what's going on, strengthening their sense of belonging and trust in the company, which is so important. If you can't just meet up at a water cooler and have these sort of interpersonal kind of bumping into each other occasions. And so because it's out there in the open, folks can contribute, folks can produce trust into what's going on, and nothing, we're not holding back. There's some things that are not that public, of course, but the bulk of it for sure is. Async comms, transparency, summing it up.
Yeah, I think that concept of transparency, and in particular, kind of having the default for most documentation or documents in general be transparent, is an interesting one. I know one company that has written about this in the past, and they went even as far as to make all email communication transparent by default. And that was Stripe, I believe. And so I'd love to hear from you about why you like to have all the documents transparent and what that brings to the table in terms of helping the team work together, but also how to avoid kind of the sprawl or entropy from taking over and just devolving into chaos of if everyone's writing documents all the time, how do you provide some structure such that you don't end up with just things everywhere across Notion and any other sources you may have?
So the benefit is trust and a more available information flow. The trick then becomes, how do you tap into the right bits of information, just because now you're drinking from that fire hose of Notion documents. one of our key processes is that of an RFC internally, and they're super lightweight. This is the
and
problem.
For anyone who's not familiar with the acronym, RFC, request for comments, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. And so this is the problem that we want to solve. This is the goal. How do we want to solve it? Usually includes also a statement about the value it will provide to Gitpod or our community, for example. These are the options that we have, and at the end is a set of next steps. And RFCs have a timeline by which they need to be completed and voted on, otherwise they just get closed. And they have a list of reviewers and approvers. And reviewers are expected to have a look and comment. Approvers are the ones making the final decision. And so this circle is chosen, but the document is still open to everyone. So everyone can have a look and, see if there is something where they really go like, oh, no, I really feel the need. I need to do something here. But the expectation is clear. Who needs to review this? Who needs to approve this? And by when does this need to happen? And what comes after? What are the steps that we're going to do? And so it's this clear expectation setting that makes it work in the end.
And how do you decide? Do you have kind of a rule of thumb or an explicit guideline on the right level of complexity for a new initiative to warrant an RFC? Like at the smallest level, you've got a bug ticket, you just do it, right? At the biggest level, we need to completely change how something is done, and it's very clear I need an RFC there. How do you think about where along that spectrum is the right place to introduce more formal documentation like that?
So there is no formal guidance right now. We also find that more often than not, RFCs are used sort of outside of, we also have issues, right? And GitHub issues. So you can have discussions on those. And so it doesn't supplant that. It doesn't replace that. Sort of as a rule of thumb, if more than 2 people need to be involved in the discussion or in the decision, it should be an RFC.
Okay.
And just because they're so lightweight, there's so little ceremony attached to them. There's no calls that you need to set up or any of that jazz. They're easy to do, and so there is little cost associated with them.
And then in terms of the actual technology behind the scenes, I saw a talk on the Gitpod YouTube channel that covers some of the architecture of the application itself. It's built on top of Kubernetes, where each workspace is a pod. What are you all using? Where are those Kubernetes clusters deployed? How are you deploying them? I'd love to hear about sort of the infrastructure piece of the puzzle, and then we can shift gears a little bit more towards the application infrastructure and architecture itself.
Mm-hmm. So Gitpod IO, Gitpod SaaS, is running on GCP, partially on GKE, and partially on K3S clusters spun up on top of GCP VMs. The reason for this separation, and that along those lines is also where our deployment methods differ. So we essentially have 2 key parts of the application. There is what we call web app, and there is workspace. And web app is much closer to your sort of traditional SaaS product, right? It's Node.js, there is a React front end, there is a database. It's reasonably standard in terms of tech stack. And so that gets deployed using Argo CD on top of GKE. We have abandoned Helm. We used to use Helm. We've gone away from that. That's a very interesting discussion, which we can dive into in a moment. But yeah, so this is sort of your usual deployment process. There's a gradual rollout. There are feature flags, SLIs, SLOs, the usual shebang in terms of running this stuff. And then there's the workspace side, which is slightly more tricky, because Gitpod workspaces, as you said, are pods, and they're not your usual pod. They're super stateful, right? I mean, there's a human interacting with this particular state directly, the source code that you're editing. So we must not lose that. We also cannot just move that from one machine to another. They have very specific requirements around latency and throughput, if you so like, because you're interacting with it. It's a very interactive workload. And so we've come, and we have very specific infrastructure requirements just to make Gitpod quick and make it secure. We run on very recent kernels. We have a lot of fun stuff going on around the containers that we run, not only at the runtime side, but also orchestration and image pulls. And to make all that happen, we essentially run K3S on top of on top of GCP VMs with our own image so that we can have the right kernel version that we want to have.
And so the K3s clusters are used for the workspace clusters, right, whereas the GKE is used for the more traditional front-end kind of web app that is Gitpod.io. Exactly right. Okay.
That's exactly how it is. And then the K3s stuff essentially gets deployed with a CI job. We stand the cluster and deploy, like throw the Kubernetes YAML at it, run a bunch of integration load tests. And once it's ready, it gets registered with web app. And there we go.
And are you using any provisioning tool, whether it's Terraform or configuration tools, to actually spin that up? Or how are you actually provisioning and then configuring those instances and or clusters?
So the GKE clusters are produced using Terraform. The workspace clusters are essentially a shell script, really. And the reason they differ so much is because our teams they're completely autonomous. They're autonomous. They have autonomy over how they want to deploy and how they want to operate. They have goals, and we call them success criteria. Think of it, it's essentially an SLO. And that they need to reach and that they aim for. But how they get there is up to the teams. And so the team responsible for deploying those clusters chose Bash. And that's how they operate.
Nice. And you hinted at this, but you talked about how each of these workspaces is super stateful, and you even said the line, we can't just move it from one node to another. What happens when one of those VMs in Google's data center, you have a networking blip and it becomes unhealthy? Sort of what happens and how do you handle that and recover from that type of a failure?
Yeah, failure modes are always a very fun discussion around, especially those particular workloads. So if it's just a blip, if this thing comes back online within, say, a few seconds, 10, 20, 30 seconds, you'll essentially see a connection dialog and you'll reconnect and everything goes as it should. If this thing actually goes down, then it depends on how hard it goes down. Like, do we still get some signal out of this, or does it just not answer anymore? At the end, the tricky bit is, handling these particular cases, providing a good user experience and not losing data. So the most important thing that we don't want to lose is exactly, these hours of work that you just put in and you hadn't committed yet. And so we're just now moving to essentially persistent volumes where the data is going to live, just to exactly support this kind of case. Your node goes down, that's fine. Data lives somewhere else.
Got it. And then you've also mentioned sort of this need for fast image pulls. Beforehand, you mentioned a couple of upcoming talks at Kubecon, right? At least one of them is focused on that aspect, right?
That's right. Alejandro de Brito Fontes, one of our most senior engineers, and I will be giving a talk at KubeCon North America this year about fast image pulls using IPFS. And so one mechanism, like the use case that we have is very interesting because users can bring their own Docker image, essentially their own container image that they want to run, because that sort of specifies the tools that you have available as a developer. And so we get a large swath of, unconnected, not with little layer reuse images, and yet we want to start workspaces as quickly as we can. So
do you put any requirements on the underlying OS in those images and or architecture?
Yes, x86, and it needs to be libc. So okay. Muscle libc, an Alpine image won't work. And that's because the sole reason for that requirement is that the IDE at the end, at least the back end of the IDE needs to run in the same userland. And so we stack that on top. And so that's where that requirement comes from. But otherwise, we have no such requirement. You can pretty much bring whatever you want.
Right, because effectively the customer specifies an image that they may have pre-installed some dependencies into, but then you pull that image and add additional layers on the fly that has the IDE and stuff built in, right?
That's right. So we went through many different iterations to make that happen, but at the end, what we need to do is, we have sort of the base layer, we call that the workspace image, which, as you said, the user has installed all the tools they want. We can also build that image for you. Like in the Gitpod YAML, you can specify a Docker file, we'll build it for you. But then in the same userland, we need additional files, the IDE backend, some services of our own. And we do that, like we went through the, like, let's do this with 2 containers in the same pod, and like, the usual ways you would think and go about this. But there's a lot of reasons why that doesn't work in an IDE setting. So we ended up introducing a mechanism that we call registry facade. And it's essentially, it speaks the OCI distribution spec that container D in our case will then pull from or pull through. And registry facade behind the scenes will talk to another component asking, hey, for this workspace, like what kind of configuration do you want me to run? What IDE do you want me to use? What workspace image do you want me to use? And then a bunch of other stuff. And so the container that's actually running is not just a workspace image, but it's a manifest that was sort of created on the fly as that image was being pulled.
Yeah, no, that's very, very interesting, and I think a clever solution to that challenge. I'd love to hear why you moved away from Helm. I think Helm is currently kind of the de facto standard for packaging up a lot of Kubernetes applications. There's so many competitors out there that are trying to solve the same challenge of how you bundle things up and configure them for different environments and deploy into those environments. Any thoughts on why you used it, and then why you decided to move away from it?
Mm-hmm. We used it exactly for that reason. It's like the de facto standard, right? If you want to package a Kubernetes application of some sort, Helm is the go-to way. And because you can self-host Gitpod, it also, really made sense because it's what a lot of folks expect they get when they need to operate and install software. The reason we went away is, so first I should probably say what we went towards. So we're not using Helm anymore. Instead, we are using essentially a custom Go installer. So it's Go code. And there were several motivations for that. One, our Helm chart had become incredibly complex. Like it was an amalgam of templates and the age-old problem that you need to externalize some things into the values YAML because you cannot template that one. And we found that the configuration surface that we offered to users was just terrible, and mainly some of it was historical growth and technical debt, but it was also just because Helm wouldn't let us do the things we wanted to do. We needed to put things in the values YAML just out of technical necessity, not because it made for a good experience. The other big problem that we saw was configuration drift. We had more than one instance where the configuration of a service changed, and the generated config map YAML essentially didn't keep up. Mm-hmm. And it was from minor things like, a comma too many in a JSON file, to key spelling mistakes, to things just being plain outdated.
And you don't get a lot of the static checks in a Helm chart that you might in a language like Go, right?
That's exactly right. And so most of our services are actually Go. And so the installer now just reuses the very same structs that the services themselves use. And so a lot of this sort of config drift problem has gone away because of that.
Got it. It reminds me of a project that Chris Nova was building called NAML. I don't know if you've seen that.
We used that to make the switch, actually.
Awesome.
It was super helpful we basically rendered out the Helm chart, and then we used that to make the initial lift into the new installer.
Amazing. That's super cool. By definition, Gitpod is enabling arbitrary code execution with the ability to act as a privileged user inside of this context, which at face value sounds very scary. And so I'd love to touch on security a bit towards the end of this discussion, and sort of how you think about security, how you enable and empower your teams to make sure that these environments are isolated and you don't have security incidents or minimize the chance of security incidents.
Yeah, it's not just scary at face value. It's also scary when you think about it some more. So on the web app side, without by any means wanting to downplay that, it's a bit more of a known beast. It's a known animal. essentially, securing a web application. Although there's also again, I don't want to downplay that. That's hard enough to do as it stands. Especially because we have some very particular features where, for example, you can register your own OAuth provider with us, and then you can use that you used to be able to use that to log in, and there's all sorts of interaction between features that is quite hard to foresee and to catch. On the workspace side, it's particularly interesting because, as you said, it's essentially arbitrary code execution as a service in a multi-tenant Kubernetes cluster. That makes my neck hair raise. So, and within a workspace, you get things like, you get cap sysadmin, you get capnut raw, you get, all these fun things that would be the first step towards a container escape. The reason we believe it's okay to do this is because we built a bunch of tech and layers on top that specifically center around user namespaces and seccomp notify and seccomp to make this more secure. It is by no means something that you build once and then you trust that it's going to be secure indefinitely. And that's exactly the part that makes me sleep at night, is that we have teams, specifically the workspace team, where we have several members who are really deeply involved on the sort of intersection between Linux and containers. So they're very aware of what's going on in this space. They keep a very active eye on, CVEs that come out, and have a very close ear to that community. And so we're very aware of things happening in that space. And exactly because we have a decent amount of control on the infrastructure that these things run on. That was one of the reasons to move away from GKE and run our own Kubernetes clusters. We can react really, really quickly to threats that emerge. And the beginning of this year has been a bumpy ride. There have been quite a few CVEs that hit close to home. None where we were all right, this is something someone could have exploited. But a few that were all right, if we don't do something in the next day, this is going to become a problem. So, yeah, being on top of that is empowering the teams to make decisions all the way down the stack that serves their need and gives them enough space to act, really is the key. And then, empowerment of teams is not just giving them the decision space to do that, but also giving them the capability to do that. And very actively build out a team with folks who know this space and who have the knowledge and the drive to do that.
And I think, as you mentioned, for highly regulated industries or where you're dealing with particularly sensitive data, there is the self-host option to contain Gitpod within your own VPC and avoid that multi-tenancy question altogether, right?
That's right. And we do see it used for that a lot. And then even within a Gitpod installation, for example, it's possible to separate workloads onto different node pools. If say within your same organization, you have data scientists working on customer data and you have, some front-end development going on, not necessarily working with such sensitive data, you'll still probably want to separate them onto different node pools just to avoid some cross-contamination should anything ever happen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I've really enjoyed our discussion today. I think we've covered a lot of ground, ranging from, hey, what the heck is a remote development environment? Why community matters for building out a company in the developer experience space. We got to take a little bit of a peek behind the scenes at Gitpod, which is super interesting, I think, for me, and the audience will enjoy that as well. If someone wants to get started trying out Gitpod, where do they go? Just to gitpod.io?
Yes, gitpod.io. And you can start with our docs,
Awesome.
but we also have some screencasts if you prefer to watch a video about how Gitpod works. Can I also pitch our community?
Please do.
Okay, so also if you do have any questions about your specific setup and you need some help with it, feel free to drop into our community. You can find that at gitpod.io/chat. And we basically hang out there all the time. So someone will definitely help you out if you have any questions.
Chris, did you have one more thing?
Yeah, one of the cool things about Gitpod is exactly that our purpose is to be always ready to code. So it's one of those products that are just so easy to try out. Going to gitpod.io is really a good idea because it gives you a bit more context. If you want to try it, go to any GitHub repo of your choice, put gitpod.io/hash in front of that URL, hit return, and you'll experience Gitpod. And that's all
right,
there is.
Because that'll actually bring up a new workspace with the context and clone that repo right in, right?
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we have some limited guessing at what kind of, what language you're using. If it's Go, it'll run Go get or Go mod download. If it's Yarn, it'll run Yarn install. And there's some nice things that will happen once you open that workspace.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining today. And I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot for having us. Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye.